Hello, and welcome back to another episode of C-Suite Unplugged. I'm your host, Adam Legg, and in this series, I talk to Alberta's top CEOs, entrepreneurs, and business leaders about their journey to the C-suite, what keeps them up at night, their perspective as a leader in their industry, and their outlook on the future. If you find this episode interesting or insightful, let us know by heading over to Apple Podcasts or Spotify and leaving us a quick review and rating. Now, on to the show. Welcome back to another C-Suite Unplugged. Well, there's lots to get done on our path to reducing emissions. Lots of good ideas exist, but it takes investment and implementation to get results. And today we're lucky to be speaking with a CEO who is doing just that. Jesse Douglas of Green Impact Partners has spent a career in the energy sector and is now leading the charge in emissions reduction investments, some at even negative emissions even. Jesse has some insightful and pragmatic views on some of the ideas and rhetoric that works and some that won't, and how getting it right really does lie in getting the details right. So Jesse, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Adam.
Jesse, we're recording this in mid-March, and for our listeners can't see, but I'm staring at your smiling face on the cover of the March issue of Business and Calgary magazine. So congratulations for being on that and being able to tell the Green Impact Partners story. But for our listeners who don't know you yet, introduce yourself and give us your elevator pitch on Green Impact Partners and the role you play there.
Yeah, thank you. I actually haven't seen the magazine yet. I've been meaning to grab a copy and haven't received it, but appreciate that. Yeah, I'm Jesse Douglas. I'm the founder and CEO of Green Impact Partners, and certainly as we get into it, I've got some views on what I do as a CEO, but I guess I'm by definition the senior officer in charge. And Green Impact Partners really is, we're an energy producer as much as we are a waste management company. And I say that because our focus really is in managing farm-based waste and turning it into energy. We need that to be predictable, drop into the grid style energy that can be used by everything that's happening today. And we focus on farm-based waste because we really think that kind of decarbonizing our food and farm sector is as important as decarbonizing the energy sector.
Yeah, we're excited to dig into the actual technicalities of the projects here, Jesse. But to begin, we're going to focus a little bit more on you. People love to hear the journey of a CEO. And so tell us about the journey from Jesse finishing high school, had the whole world in front of him, to where you are today. What did that journey look like?
Yeah, I mean, I wish you knew as much in high school how much of the world you had in front of you, right? It feels like you've got to rush to get things done and work through that. So
Yeah.
I kind of did. I mean, went to university, played football, ran track. I think had those things not been in front of me, maybe I wouldn't have gone to university and kind of learned some of the things I did, met some of the people I did, and ended up down the path we're on. While there, certainly was an entrepreneur, started into real estate development, worked through construction, born and raised in Alberta. And so the energy sector always has a big draw on what you're doing there, as well as certainly didn't have maybe some of the financial backing as some of the big pensions started getting into the high rise and development business in Alberta. Getting to compete with them was getting tougher and tougher. Moved more into the energy sector and in construction and development. And yeah, enjoyed that. Had service companies, had some drilling companies, had worked through kind of all parts of it through oil sands, gas, sour gas, and really enjoyed all of that. And through it, it kind of felt like for many years, and maybe it still does today, I'm a bit on the other side of it now in onto the kind of clean and decarbonizing side, but it really felt like we had some of the world's best and cleanest energy and a commitment to making it cleaner all the time. And it kind of felt like the world didn't want it. So it really was a drive for us, for me and for a lot of our partners, co-founders in this business and people that I'd worked with for a long time, a desire to find ways to decarbonize. And so we worked on a bunch of different technologies and worked through a bunch of different ideas. And we kind of, wouldn't say stumbled across, but found that the most impactful thing we could do in the short term was work on biofuels and work on waste-based biofuels.
As you were in university, what drew you first to the real estate sector, and then secondly to the energy sector?
My grandfather, he ultimately probably raised me as much as my parents did, my grandmother and my grandfather, and he was always in construction. And it was something I just kind of had a passion about, right? As a kid, I could ride by new houses or buildings being built and stop and watch them for hours, and got an opportunity to spend a lot of time in construction from a young age. And seemed like an easy fit, something you had a knowledge base in. And I owed my parents some money as a kid because I had a party and wrecked their house a little bit. So I was forced into starting a business to be able to pay them back. And we did roofing and decking and that kind of stuff, and was
Right.
able to hire my hockey and football buddies. And
Work
I
your
could
debt
have stuck with that business. It was probably the best cash business we ever had.
down. That's funny. Was it a conscious decision? And you were saying earlier that felt like the world didn't want the energy that we have. Was that the impetus for the move away from the conventional oil and gas industry into the green impact partner model?
It was, yeah, it was. Certainly we were looking at technologies and things we could do with sites and investments that we already had. Really, the initial focus was how can we sweeten up some of the heavy oil that's moving through without a refining process and using some other catalysts. And I still think that some of those ideas are going to provide a lot of fruit for the conventional oil and gas business. But as we dug further and further, we really found like drop-in fuels like biofuels really do kind of decarbonize that existing grid. And if
Mm.
you can find a way to produce those at scale and drop them in at scale, you've inherently decarbonized that grid. I mean, we are not yet, and do believe that would love Green Impact to have a balance sheet big enough to invest on this side. But I think the use of those fossil fuels, and one of the things that scares me the most is the lack of investment in using fossil fuels in a cleaner way. I don't believe that we have a world that exists in the near term for sure that doesn't get powered by fossil fuels primarily.
Yeah, totally agree. Jesse, what is your leadership philosophy? Has it been influenced by other people, mentors, guides, and what type of leader do you want to be remembered as?
I don't know that I've spent much time thinking about how I'd like to be remembered. I certainly have some great leaders and guides in there. Spend my life in Edmonton growing up there and very entrepreneurial community. Got some great friends and even some of their fathers were great business people and inspire you to where you see in those family businesses is that they do invest in their family and do things in a different way, right? And almost inherently without thought to it. And I've had lots of businesses and it really, I think my leadership style is always invest in people, have a purpose driven business, find people that are inspired and aligned with your purpose and inspire them to do great things. And really, we tap into my belief is that the greatest renewable energy in the world is inspired humans.
Hmm.
And so if we can find a way to tap into that by providing a business, having a business platform that is inspiring in what it's trying to do, and having people that are aligned in that inspiration, ideally we can find people that don't just like their job, but love their job. And if they love their job, we're going to get a lot more out of them by treating them really well and not having to manage them, just simply continuing that inspiration for them. So yeah, try to lead by inspiration, which maybe hasn't always been that leadership strategy, but certainly is now.
I was going to say it often takes sometimes a few leadership roles and figuring out the footing as a CEO to really get that calibration right. And so you're right. I mean, if you have a purpose-driven organization and something that people rally behind, it feels greater than a work, feels like greater than a job, and something that they're actually contributing to making the world better. What advice would you have for someone starting their career? If someone were to come and say, I want to be the next Jesse Douglas, what would you encourage them to do or not do?
First of all, don't say that. You don't want to be the next Jesse Douglas, that's for sure. If you can avoid all the mistakes I made, that'd be great. Yeah, I would say challenge the status quo. Don't follow the path that's expected for you. Really look at like my kids are in high school now and moving that direction. And I'm struggling with whether or not university is the right path for everyone. And they're smart enough and they've got good grades and they could get there. But it's finding that piece that inspires you or going there at the right time when you know what you want to do and don't feel like you've got to kind of get on with life immediately and kind of get through something and get to a job. Find things that inspire you, be around people that inspire you, and challenge everything. Not in a hostile and aggressive way, but really ask great questions, right? And if people don't have answers, maybe that's someplace you need to dig in further to.
Hmm. Hmm. Jesse, you acknowledged very early in your career in university or entrepreneurial spirit, and maybe that was the necessity of paying back the house repairs to your parents. But where did your entrepreneurial spirit come from?
Yeah, I would say, I mean, being in Edmonton, it is a very entrepreneurial community. And my mom, from a young age, without really saying it, kind of implied that if you were going to make a difference and going to make something of yourself, it probably was going to be by being an entrepreneur and being a leader. And so that kind of felt like, as much as university was very much expected, and there was no path for me that didn't involve that, I think, from an expectation from my family and parents, I think it almost kind of felt the same way with being an entrepreneur. Like I think that it was kind of just an expectation that that's the path you were going to take.
In an interview with Made in Canada last year, you made some interesting comments about losing sight of what mattered with some of the businesses
Yeah.
now focusing on being purpose driven instead of profit driven. Was there anything that was a bit of an aha moment or a tipping point where you did move to that more purpose driven focus, or was it a culmination, a bit of a slow burn to a realization?
I would say it was definitely a slow burn. If I had to pick any tipping point, it would be probably discussion with my wife, who certainly challenges me as much as she inspires me. And I remember like spending some time with her where we're talking about what retirement looks like and where savings are, and we've been lucky in some of our businesses and been lucky to do well with some investments, and she sort of said like you're spending a lot of time, and I worked probably more than 100 hours a week for decades, and she was sort of challenging me to say like, do we need any more money, and are you working for the money? And I thought,
Hmm.
no, I'm not. And really, so that might have been the bit of an aha moment of like, well, if I'm still willing to work this hard and it's not for the money, what is it for? And I think as much as a purpose-driven business, it's a people-focused business, right? And we do, I think, at Green Impact, I hope our people realize this, but they are our most important asset. We try to count them regularly. We try to invest in them. We count inventory sometimes by the day or by the hour or by the minute, depending on the type of business you are, right? But you do annual reviews with your people. It's not probably the right thing. And the amount you spend on people and their salaries and other things, like if you look at that continuing investment that was there, they probably cost you more than a lot of your assets in many cases, right? It's not at one time, but over time. And we don't count them enough. So if we've got a great purpose and we can invest in those people, and I always think back to the mentors you have, right? I didn't really have jobs so much as I've pretty much always been an entrepreneur, but other than maybe short stints here and there. And but you always look back at the people that did invest in you, right? The people you knew cared about you, that made you feel safe, that you could do or say anything. And so we can create a business that really makes people feel safe and has that purpose there. I think that's kind of the spot. And yeah, so that was the aha moment, I guess.
Sounds like your wife asked you the perfect question at probably the perfect time, and that notion of rich beyond all, or what are we going to do
Yeah.
for something bigger and more purposeful?
I would say often, if not always, ask me the perfect question. Just maybe not always the perfect time, because knowing a husband and wife relationship.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Perfect question though, man. Maybe.
Yeah.
Jesse, let's talk a little bit about Green Impact Partners and the work that you're doing there. I don't think everyone would immediately think of farm-based waste as a way of providing energy at scale. So perhaps tell us a little bit about the biofuels, bioenergy. What are they? What makes them carbon neutral? What advantages do they have in contributing to a carbon neutral energy system?
Yeah, maybe I'll step back from farm-based waste a little bit and just talk about overall biofuels, if that's okay, Adam, as far
Sure,
as
yeah.
where they're at.
Absolutely.
Like
Yeah.
certainly, I mean, the largest produced biofuel probably in the world would be ethanol, right? And it's typically corn-based ethanol, although there are
Mhm.
sugarcane bases and other bases around the world, and good drop-in blended fuel. But most of the ethanol that's produced is purpose crop grown. Good and bad with that. I mean, I'm not here to bash any type of energy that people are working through, and wouldn't claim to know everything about every type of energy that people are going through. But for us, we looked at it and said, okay, well, there are arguments that you're taking food for fuel then, and we do agree with them. And I can't say we would never do that, but we're not doing that today. We think that it's important to be taking waste and looking to be carbon neutral or better in what we do. And then you've got other forms where you've got a lot of methane waste that comes off farms, right? Whether that be from manure or from other parts of kind of non-conforming grains or the overall organic waste process that comes from farming. And so capturing that methane, it's drop in, it's the same CH4 that natural gas is. And so it's a perfect drop in fuel that way. And you're not really going outside to make it. And then you've got some kind of wood based and other based biofuels like methanol and things like that that are still a little bit more energy intensive, but important pieces to have in the works. And I think in continuing to invest in them, however they're being derived, whether they're purpose grown or waste based, the better we can get at producing and more efficient we can get at producing those biofuels, the better environmental impact we can have. And they are all drop in directly blendable fuels with the existing largest provider in energy in the world in fossil fuels right now.
Hmm. How is Alberta positioned in terms of the feedstock, the supply of some of those biofuels?
I mean, Alberta is a great farming community. There's no doubt, right? Of the biggest growers of wheat, I think Saskatchewan might be slightly bigger, but very close, and certainly a huge grain grower. And a lot of that becomes waste based, so it fits really well for us. But I mean, whether you were taking wheat or waste wheat for ethanol, that's a great, well-proven, predictable process that's used in multiple parts of the world. And then we've got a lot of farming, livestock, and other things. And we haven't seen companies yet perfect the feedlot to RNG process and capturing that manure. We've seen some do it, and we've seen some do it okay. We've spent quite a few years now and have some Alberta-based partners that we're really, really proud and happy of, who invested with us and been patient enough to let us kind of do the research and the work on their sites, as opposed to saying, hey, just get something built here, which is often what happens, right? Where everybody's in a rush to get something done. And so their patience has allowed us to get a lot more data and to use it in some of our other facilities and look at the ways that are there. And I think we're hopefully in the very near future, we'll be able to start construction on some pretty large facilities related to manure management in Alberta. But already our plan certainly is that this year we'll be in construction. Plan is to be under construction this year for Future Energy Park, which will be in our view, from everything we can find, the largest carbon negative energy facility in the world. And it's taking fairly local grains, waste-based wheat, the grade 3 wheat, industrial wheat that doesn't meet either food or feed grade, taking that, turning it into ethanol, and then taking the byproduct of that, making RNG from it, and then upgrading that a little further and turning that wheat that couldn't really be used for anything into now animal feed. And so we think it's a pretty great way to work through the entire circular economy on one site in a province where energy and ag are the biggest and most impactful industries we have here. And so we think what a perfect spot to do it, and a perfect project for a province like this.
It's amazing. You're taking that one product, that low grade grain, and turning it into multiple final products, one being renewable natural gas, the other being feed. It sounds absolutely incredible. And how did that come together for you? What was the spark of the concept around the Future Energy Park?
Yeah, I mean, for one, like we've got some great development partners on there who had spent well more than a decade now with an idea of taking a wheat-based ethanol facility in the province, and certainly Canada is a major importer of ethanol, and there are other wheat-based ethanol facilities in the province. So the idea was good, and certainly as we kind of joined into it and started looking into it, it didn't quite meet our mandate to just be a wheat-based ethanol facility, and so we push a little harder to say, let's make sure it's waste wheat. Let's make sure that we're going to use it to do absolutely everything we possibly can. We're also capturing CO2 on that, and we'll be sequestering it, although we could get into a long argument about whether or not we should be sequestering that CO2. we are capturing it and sequestering it. And so we continually just push to make sure that we could get the facility to be carbon negative. And it wasn't easy. It took a lot of challenge, and our team couldn't be prouder of the team in finding solutions where we presented challenges and said, like, there's got to be a way to do better. And the initial response from a lot of the technology design companies and the producer of ethanol or ethanol facilities around the world was, no, that's just what it looks like. That's where it's at. And our engineering design development team pushed really hard to find solutions to get the project to carbon negative and get it to be profitable at the same time, right? And so we're very much a for-profit business. We know that we need that profit both to reward our shareholders for the risk they're taking and being invested with us, but also to continue to invest in the business and build more projects like this. We can't make a very big impact if we build one and have no cash to do anything with after that.
Mm-hmm. I was going to ask in terms of this as a bit of a pilot or demonstration project, prove it at scale, and then do you see this kind of facility being deployed across the world, or is this very much unique to Alberta proposition?
I think this type of thing for us, really, I mean, my belief is that in North America, where we've got some great carbon pricing schemes, which I think are important, not to get into a debate about whether or not we should have a carbon tax and other things and where we should do it. I'm both for and against it, depending on how it's deployed. But we do have it, and it does provide us with economics that are better here to try new things. And hopefully we can try and perfect those things. I wouldn't say it's a demonstration, because it'll be the largest carbon negative facility in the world, potentially. So certainly it is full scale and working through it. But if we can really perfect what we do here and be able to deploy technologies like this, right? I mean, in order to do this exact thing, you'd have to be in regions that grow wheat and have waste wheat, but it doesn't necessarily matter what the grain type is and what the farm waste stock that is coming into it is. We can perfect this and do it really well and continue to drive the cost down if you can do this in developing countries where their energy needs are growing exponentially and they need it more, and we can help them to use fossil fuels or leapfrog over kind of the coal hurdle, that I think is where we can make a real difference in the world. And so hopefully everything we're doing here, we can find ways to deploy at the same or bigger scales in developing countries.
That's awesome. What's the target date for fully operational?
Right now we're targeting 2026,
26.
late 2026. So yeah, it's a long commissioning process. It's a really big facility. There are millions and millions of gallons that go into these tanks and let's work through. But we're really excited about building this one and getting it running and having the province kind of, we are thought of in one way, but to have the cleanest energy production on scale in North America for sure, happening in also what might be thought to be the dirtiest province, which I don't agree with, but maybe thought that outside, I think is pretty important for us and hopefully important for the province.
Well, I'm excited to add it to another one of the Alberta success stories when we go and tell the world about what we do that is amazing here in this province. So I look forward to doing that. I'm going to take you up on the sequestering thread, pulling a little bit. And I know you and I have chatted about this. In fact, you've had this exact conversation with Federal Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault about is sequestering the carbon actually the best use? And so maybe unpack that a little bit for folks in terms of your view about what is some of the best potential use for the carbon that we're capturing.
I mean, sequestering carbon is highly energy intensive. So the carbon to capture it off this type of facility actually is quite easy. No big deal. It comes out, it's very clean, it's biogenic carbon. Cleaning it up just a little more could make it useful in our food and beverage industry where we are using all of from an amount perspective, all of the carbon we're using, the CO2 we're using today is produced elsewhere and produced from fossil fuels being trucked around, and we could displace that. Current policy doesn't really allow us to do that. It's frowned upon, it's considered re-released. And I do think that just the environmental math, never mind the energy math and the energy usage to truck this or pipe it or compress it and push it down whole, or it's highly energy intensive. But I do think that we could displace current uses of CO2 and be using it better. And then you've got the option of kind of additional conversion. If we were to get CO2 like this to locations where there are hydrogen and other things, we could be into synthetic gasolines and SAFs and other things. So there is a use and need for CO2 to not go down whole. I think part of it is this is easy, low energy intensity to capture, and which is a really big deal. And I think when you talk about the CCUS thread, the capture part of it, when it becomes so highly energy intensive, and we're separating from other gases, but not capturing some of the other gases, which are equally harmful to the environment. I just don't know. I'm not against it. We are doing it. I wouldn't say I'm not a proponent for considering and investing in that technology, but to say that we should take the largest power plants and nat gas power plants in Alberta and capture the carbon on all of them. The math we've done, and we've looked at it pretty extensively on many scales, is that we're building a plant between 40 and 60% of the size of the one that's producing power now, just to run the carbon capture side of it and separate that in. I don't know how much sense that makes. And then you're going to run compressors and pipelines and like, what's the environmental impact? And we know the environmental impact is huge to reduce the source emissions from the production of power. Like, I'm struggling with the full circle math, which, as you know, Adam, from many of our discussions, we very much do. And we really think is important to look at the life cycle impact of what you're doing, not just the rules that the government has given you to calculate the life cycle impact.
Yeah, totally. And it sounds from your proposal here is that there's far more that could be done with the U of CCUS than we're enabling through policy or incentive or even, frankly, just practicality. So
Yeah.
something we should be focusing on more than just stuffing it underground. So,
and certainly appreciate your and the Alberta Business Council's push to continually keep the door open for that policy adjustment. And if we can be of any help, would love to continue to work with you on that.
Likewise, we know that doing this kind of facility wouldn't have come without a lot of work to get it approved and regulations, et cetera. As you know, we've done a lot of work on regulatory reform past year. Just curious on your experience of navigating the regulatory and approval system for the future energy park, and where do you think improvements could be made for future projects?
Yeah, I think if I'm giving it a grade, I'm giving it a B or a B plus for the province. They put us into their fast track system, and overall, I'd say we're fairly happy. We spent a few spots where they took maybe Alberta Environment was a little bit slower than we would have liked, but overall still, I think, faster than original guidance. So nothing could ever be fast enough for us for sure, but certainly like we moved through a lot of the process with both the province and the city of Calgary where this is being built very quickly. The city of Calgary was great on the rezoning side. Not that they didn't put us through the ringer and force very extensive kind of community reach out and the rest of it, but we were very happy to comply. As you know, we are our community impact and how we are as a community citizen is super important to us. So certainly wasn't something we wanted to take lightly anyway. But yeah, they were very good, and then the province was very good, kind of working through the different permits that we've now gotten. And I would say the legislation related to tier for unique projects like this could probably use some adjustment. It's been a bit difficult to navigate through. I would say province has been supportive and helpful and cooperative, but it has taken quite a bit of time and energy to kind of work through that. So if we have listeners that are interested in things that we can improve to continue to impact parts like this, I think definitely on the fast tracking side of things is working well and room for improvement there. But definitely if we could find a way to improve that tier exemption process for projects like this would allow them to move through the process a lot faster.
I know Green Impact Partners has some projects in other parts of the world, or at least you're involved in projects in other parts of the world. Where should we, being Canada and Alberta, be emulating? Who around the world is doing it right in terms of encouraging, incentivizing, accommodating projects like the ones you want to do?
Probably fair to say nobody's doing it fully right. If you're being critical of what right means in having a full environmental impact and assessing things properly, California is doing a pretty good job of kind of setting rules for pollution reduction and other things, but they like many, if not maybe most or all regions of the world, are not looking at the life cycle of everything, right? So right now you see exclusions for hydrogen, wind, and solar as like, well, they're just assumed to be net zero, which I can't find an instance where that actually is the case at all. But I think it's important to make sure that it's not just fossil fuels or biofuels that are measured from a carbon intensity and overall life cycle impact perspective, but that everything is measured that way. Yeah. We're going to be making definitely the wrong choices if we exclude certain items from measurement because we have this perceived notion that they're good. And I'm not suggesting that wind and solar and hydrogen are not good or potentially good, just that we should be measuring everything so we know what the impact is. We can't just say that because it's hydro, wind, solar, or hydrogen, that it is good. It may not be. I know we see a lot of instances where we do the math and we consider putting kind of wind and solar on our facilities, and we can do it. And sometimes it does positively impact financial pieces or the perceived life cycle carbon intensity, but only because they're given kind of a zero rating to start with. If we actually consider the kind of 5 tons per acre that's no longer sequestered by the crop that would be planted there, or even the life cycle impact of just the production of the panels and the maintenance of them, they're not zero. And so a lot of times we don't proceed with adding, I guess, conventional renewables onto sites. So California's doing a great job of kind of setting some rules and leading that way. And we see the US with the Inflation Reduction Act, which couldn't be more poorly named. Maybe the Inflation Acceleration Act would be better, but they're doing a good job. That tax credit is definitely incentivizing behavior that they're driving right now. We could pick holes in that, and I would say that the province, I think, Alberta is actually doing a decent job. We're seeing like Alberta agriculture is a real driver. They've got some good tax credits right now, and I think they are pushing hard. Although there seems to be, I would say, if it's pretty well documented that there's a pretty differential thought in what cleaning up our grid and cleaning up Alberta means to the province versus the feds. And so I think that'll be an interesting struggle to see play out.
Yeah. Jesse, we're going to close on your thoughts about Alberta overall. What's your long-term view for Alberta? Are you excited? Are you concerned? What do we need to do to make sure we pick the right path?
Be naive to not be concerned, especially with the battles that are going on, but I couldn't be more excited. Like, I do think that the world is not going to need less food or less energy anytime soon, and certainly Alberta is a huge driver there. I think that great young population, see more and more entrepreneurial people coming through it, and the the kids coming out of our schools, graduating high school, graduating university, they're amazing. They are actually, I know there's this thought that this generation is not productive there. And I don't see that. I do see them. We've got to find different ways to work with them. And certainly they've got some different skills and different needs, but they are great. And so I think the province is moving in an amazing direction, having a great young population and a government that seems to be pretty committed to making change that's positive. I know we see a lot of things in the media about criticizing the potential for some of the changes that are made, but I do believe that everything they're doing right now is in the effort to protect Albertans and build Albertans further. Although I wouldn't say I agree with everything they're doing. It's lucky I don't have to make some of those choices. I can't imagine that they're easy.
Jesse, anything that we didn't cover that you want to make sure our listeners hear about you, Green Impact Partners, anything else on your mind?
I mean, holy man, how much time do we have, Adam? I think probably the only piece that we didn't really get into is the understanding of net zero, which we did a little bit, but probably don't have time to debate what net zero is and why people believe that they can get there without actually removing emissions from the environment. But maybe for another day.
Well, if you want to unpack that a little bit here, let's go for it.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, net zero for me, I mean, you and I just sitting here yabbing and breathing right now are putting CO2 in the atmosphere. So if we're going to be net zero, something or somebody's got to absorb that, right? And the best methods of sequestration are ocean management, forestry management, making sure that we're growing new forests and working through with those. As old forest age, they sequester less CO2, but recognizing what actually sequesters CO2. Putting up more zero source emission energy like wind, solar, and even electric cars isn't net zero. There is no possibility for something that once had a carbon impact and doesn't absorb CO2 or CO2 equivalents to be net zero. And so if we're going to talk about net zero by 2030, 2040, 2050, whatever time you pick in there, you got to be finding a way to absorb carbon. And we aren't looking at it that way. And I cannot imagine we could possibly capture and sequester the CO2 underground to the level we need to. We're talking about millions and millions and millions of tons, right? And I know for sure, because we've done the math and we look at it, like you can plant a forest a hell of a lot cheaper that sequesters carbon for decades. And we're not considering how that can be done. Not to mention that Canada is already by a wide wide margin net zero, so or net negative in their actual CO2 emissions. So
yeah, when you incorporate some of the forest and agricultural practices,
yeah.
Totally agree with you. Yeah, it's a long-term target at net zero by 2050 with lots of moving parts that I think we haven't fully dissected, but we've got to be on the path and figuring out as we go how to make those things happen, but in a pragmatic and realistic perspective as you paint, for sure.
And I think the biggest piece that really kind of gets under my skin is that we don't talk about the fact that everything we do has emissions and recognize that it does, right? We can't say that one thing just because it is zero emissions at some point in the scope is net zero itself. It's not net zero. At this stage, it has zero emissions. Doesn't mean it has had zero emissions, and it certainly doesn't mean that when it did have emissions, they did anything to absorb those to get it to net zero. So how do we plan to do that? I think it requires a lot more in-depth conversation and understanding of the impact of everything we're doing, which to me, we're just not doing right now. We are only doing it when it comes to fossil fuels and biofuels. And if you're not going to do it with everything, you're never going to get there.
I was going to say it. We're doing it with a very pointed spear towards the resource sector, as opposed to a broader conversation around it. I completely agree.
Which is driving behavior, but I think it's driving behavior that politicians have elected to drive, as opposed to driving behavior for meaningful change, right? And if we set the rules in a way that actually encouraged meaningful change, as opposed to just the desire to have more of one thing out there, I think that maybe we'd get a lot better results and probably get them a lot cheaper too.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Jesse, thank you for joining us on the podcast. A great overview of you, your entrepreneurial journey, project you're doing here in Calgary, the Future Energy Park, and what we need to be thinking about when we talk about net zero. So thank you.
Thanks, Adam. Appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of C-Suite Unplugged, an Alberta Better podcast series. This podcast is a production of the Business Council of Alberta. You can learn more about us at businesscouncilab.com. We'd love to connect with you on social media, so give us a follow at BizCouncilAB, that's B-I-Z, Council AB, on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. If you like this episode and want to support our message of shared prosperity for all, Please be sure to head over to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcasts to subscribe, rate the show, and give us a quick review. New episodes drop every other Tuesday. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.